You know there's only one reliability conference, and it's brought to you by ReliabilityWeb.com, and it's my pleasure to invite you to the Reliability Conference. Reliability Web searches the world for the best case studies, the best subject matter experts, the best book authors, who are all bringing you information to advance reliability and asset management at your organizations. And now we're also including Maintenance 4.0 Digitalization Forum, where we're finding case studies involving machine learning, artificial intelligence, the industrial Internet of Things, specifically in the context of advancing reliability and asset management. The Reliability Conference features over 700 professional attendees from over 50 countries. So come to the Reliability Conference and see what's waiting for you there. There's nothing but opportunity.
Bobby Lang was a fidgety kid. He was so fidgety that when he started school in 1967, he couldn't sit still. He was constantly up and moving about the classroom, much to the distraction of the teacher and to the distraction of the other students. Now, the teacher couldn't get too mad with Bobby because Bobby was brilliant. He absorbed everything she said. He could answer all of her questions, and he aced all of his exams. Nevertheless, she needed to get Bobby to settle down because he was distracting the other students. And then one day, she got the idea to teach him origami. She took him to the back of the room. She sat him down and showed him how to fold pieces of paper into little animal shapes. Bobby loved origami. He took to it like a duck to water. And he settled down, and the teacher was able to teach in peace for the rest of the year. Let's fast forward to today. Bobby Lang, Robert J. Lang, PhD, works for NASA. He has 47 patents to his name in semiconductors, optics, and lasers. Oh, and he's still into origami. As a matter of fact, he's one of the world's foremost authorities on origami because he has taken it to new levels. He is taking folding paper to levels of folding that no one has ever done before, and he has created some incredibly intricate pieces of art folding paper. So why am I telling you this? Because Robert Lang has taken his hobby of origami and applied it to his business of rocket science. That's right. He has taken his specialized knowledge, his expertise in folding, and applied it to satellites. He's come up with ways of folding satellites into smaller packages so that they take up less space on a rocket. And when they're placed into orbit, they unfold easier and faster. Robert Lang has taken his hobby and made the launching of satellites more reliable. Now, as long as we're talking about NASA and the space industry, I'd like to share a quote from Jerome Lederer, who's better known as Mr. Aviation Safety. He said back in 1969, Apollo 8 has 5,600,000 parts, 1.5 million systems, subsystems, and assemblies. And with 99.9% reliability, we can still expect 5,600 defects. He was sharing this quote to explain why NASA uses so many redundancies and why they strive for perfection. Now me, you heard in the introduction, I collect graffiti. Well, I once saw on a bathroom wall at Georgia Tech, somebody had written, well, if gravity is 99% reliable, then we'd all be floating 14 minutes a day. And then somebody came and wrote underneath that, there is no such thing as gravity, the earth sucks. Let's look at another hobbyist, how about it? Let's back in the early 2000s, Dr. Alan Goldman, who was the chief physician with the Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital in London, England, was concerned. He was concerned because a lot of mistakes were being made when patients were being transferred from the surgery to the intensive care unit. When there was a transfer, a lot of people would come together around the patient. Equipment, paperwork was exchanged, and a lot of information, and unfortunately, orders were getting lost. And treatments were not being given, which had the potential to lead to some very disastrous results. So they needed to fix this. And they had tried a number of things which just wasn't working. And then one day, Dr. Goldman's got a day off. He's relaxing and pursuing his favorite hobby, which is watching Formula One racing. And on this particular day, he becomes fascinated by the pit crew because something about all those people gathering around a car reminded him of all those people gathering around the patient gurney. And as he watched the car pull into the pit, all these people came together. They changed the tires, refueled the car, cleaned the vent, and a couple of other things, and then the car was back in the race in 7 seconds. He's like, wow. These guys, their process is organized, it's efficient, it's fast, and it's reliable. I need to talk to these people. I wonder if they'll come over to the hospital and do a consultation with me. So the next day, he called Ferrari. And he talked to the Ferrari pit crew chief, and he said, can you come over to my hospital? I need you to look at our process and see if you can make some recommendations, because people might die over here. And so they did. The Ferrari pit crew came over. They spent several days watching his patient transfer procedure, and they came back and presented him with a 3-step procedure, which they then implemented, and it reduced errors 49%. You see, when you have a hobby, you have specialized knowledge. You have expertise. You have skills. And if you can apply those to some other area of your life or business, you might have something indeed. You might be an innovator. So how about you? What hobbies do you have? Do you collect something? Do you make or build something? Do you study something just because it fascinates you? Or is it sports or music that you're into? So by a show of hands, how many hobbyists do we have in the room? All right, quite a few of you. Indeed, almost everybody in the room. Well, that's good to hear, because what I would like to do is plant a seed. I want you to think about this in the coming days, how you might take your specialized knowledge from your hobby and apply it to something else. We're here to talk about innovation today. How could I forget that? Because innovation isn't just for big corporations. Innovation is for everybody, because the more you begin to think like an innovator, the more you begin to embrace elements of the innovator's lifestyle, amazing things are going to happen to you. But I got to tell you, I got to warn you, there are going to be people who don't want you to hear my message. That's right. A lot of people, and some of them might be close to you. That might be your friends and family, might be your neighbors, might be your colleagues or coworkers, that might even be your boss. Because you know what's going to happen? You know why they don't want you to hear my message? Because if you implement my message, you might rock the boat. That's right. And what happens when you rock the boat? Well, people fall out. Now, you don't have to worry about anybody drowning. I'm just speaking figuratively here today. But when people fall out of a boat, what happens? They get left behind. And people don't like to be left behind. It makes them angry, and it makes them afraid. And some of them might be eaten by sharks, figuratively speaking. So what do they do? let's find out how many of you, oh, this is where I wanted to go. When you start to implement, and if you implement my message extremely well, there are some psychologists who will say you have a mental illness. But don't pay any attention to them. In fact, don't listen to any of the naysayers because they're just envious. Now, why are they envious? They're envious because when you implement my message, you are going to develop a superpower. Yes, a superpower. Now, will this superpower get you into the next Marvel Avengers movie? Probably not. But it might help you write it. What is this superpower? What is this superpower? Well, that's going to unfold as I continue talking with you today, but let me give you a hint. As you develop the ability to think more like an innovator, you will recognize opportunities that others will not. You will handle change like a boss. Heck, it'll even improve your sex life, and it will keep you from becoming senile as you get older. That's a pretty tall bill, isn't it? No wonder so many people are going to be envious of you. So let's find out how many of you have already begun to develop this superpower. So let me see by a show of hands. How many innovators do we have in the room? Oh, that's pretty good. And how about creative thinkers? How many creative thinkers in the room? All right, not bad. Well, I got to tell you, usually when I ask this question of my audiences, rarely do I see as many as 10% of the people raise their hands. And the reason that's true is because as we go through the socialization process of going to school, we are repeatedly taught to conform until most of us have repressed our natural creative tendencies. So much so that by the time we reach adulthood, most of us believe that creativity is a gift that only some people are born with. But I've got some good news for you. It is not a gift. It is a skill, but it is a critical skill in today's ever-changing world. Because if you are not changing with the changes going on around you, you're going to get left behind. And you might be eaten by sharks, figuratively speaking. I think Andy Grove down here at Intel said it best. He said, adapt or die. An example of a company that did not adapt, and I know a lot of you people in here know this story, is Kodak. Kodak in 1975 invented the digital camera. Their R&D department created this new electronic camera. They take it to management and go, hey, look what we invented. Management goes, what? Do you not realize our primary business is film, developing chemicals, and photographic paper? We can't go to market with that. And so they didn't. 6 years later, Sony goes to market with the first electronic camera, and the rest is history. Today, Kodak is a dying company. It's all about creative destruction. Creative destruction is a term coined in 1943 by economist Joseph Schumpeter to describe the process by which a new technology makes an old technology obsolete. And it's happening faster and faster. Creative destruction is like a steamroller without a driver heading right toward your business. And there's really nothing you can do to stop it. The only thing you can do is prepare for it. And that's where you, in the reliability industry, are going to be on the cutting edge. Right now, I've just noticed in the last few months, some articles that I've seen, McDonald's is going to have self-service kiosks in every store by the end of 2020. Walmart is putting robots in their stores. Yes, robots that will be cleaning floors, easy enough, taking inventory, unloading trucks, and warehousing. Can you say Skynet? And then there's driverless trucks. That's coming, folks. Now, the average American is not really interested in a driverless car. We like to have control. But that's not what's driving this. What's driving this is the fact that we are nearly 1 million truck drivers short of demand. Those jobs aren't going to be filled anytime soon. They probably won't be filled at all. And you've got transportation people demanding. We've got more and more need for trucking and drivers. The only solution is driverless trucks. So you've got several companies right now already working on this. They're already experimenting on the roads. And who's going to be there to fix these? You guys. Today, the world is moving rapidly towards automation and artificial intelligence. And you are the guys who need to be ready for this. And as you learn to think more like an innovator, the more you embrace the innovator's lifestyle, the better prepared you will be to recognize these trends as they're coming along. The better prepared you will be to change with the changes going on. Now, I mentioned that creativity is a skill. Creative thinking is a skill. Being an innovator is a skill. Now, how many of you would like to think even more creatively? Okay, pretty much everybody in the room. Well, where do you get started? How do you get that skill back? Well, let's start with a quote from Albert Georgi. Albert Georgi is the Nobel Prize-winning scientist who discovered vitamin C. Albert Georgi once said, "Discovery consists in looking at the same things as everyone else, but thinking something different." Well, that sounds easy enough, doesn't it? Until you start to realize, hey, I've been looking at the same things day in, day out for years, and I have never had a different thought about them. So what do we do? And then we've got the ghost of Albert Einstein over here taunting us with his famous quote, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results." Which tells us that we do need to be doing something different, but what is that? Well, the answer was given to us in a popular motion picture that came out 30 years ago. And so, how many of you have seen the Dead Poets Society? All right, well, for those of you who haven't, I highly recommend it. It is a motion picture about a boarding school set in New England in the 1950s for boys who are being groomed for the Ivy League. One day, their English teacher, who is played by Robin Williams, walks into the classroom, climbs up on top of his desk, and he asks the students, "Why do I stand upon my desk?" Well, the kids are clueless, so he goes ahead and tells them, "I stand upon my desk to remind myself that we must constantly look at things in different ways." There it is. There is your key to creative thinking. Looking at things in different ways. Albert Georgi said, look at the same things as everyone else, but think something different. How do we think something different? We have to get a different perspective. Yes, that is part of stimulating creative thinking on demand, is to trigger this ability by getting a different perspective. Now, you could go out and get, there are dozens of books written on stimulating creative thinking. And all of them will teach you one thing. They'll give you lots and lots of techniques. But when you boil it all down, each of those techniques is designed to do just one thing, and that is to force you to get a different perspective. Now, I'm going to share with you a technique that's very easy that you can use easily anytime you're looking to come up with a new idea or maybe resolve a situation. This is what I want you to do. I want you to ask yourself, what would I do if the opposite were true? That will help you stimulate creative thinking. What would I do if the opposite were true? Let's create a scenario. Imagine that you're a small business owner and that you've been successful, and that all of a sudden a recession comes along and you're losing market share rapidly, you're having a hard time finding new clients, you're losing clients, and you're beginning to panic. You're beginning to think you might have a crisis on your hands. So what do? Ask yourself what you would do if the opposite were true. What would you do if you had more clients than you knew what to do with? What would you do if you were overwhelmed with clients and you couldn't handle servicing them all? What would you do for that? Think on that for a while. Write about it a little bit. And as you do, this little technique is very likely to trigger an idea that will lead to solve your original dilemma of not having enough clients. Now, I mentioned you might be thinking this is a crisis. There's an interesting thing about the Chinese language. In the Chinese language, they have a symbol that can be used for both crisis or opportunity. And if you think about it, crisis and opportunity are really just two sides of the same coin. Depending on what? Your perspective. That's right. So you want to make sure that you can change that perspective, and if you have to, you force it. That's part of becoming an innovator. There are several things that coalesce together to become an innovator, and that is partly technique, which I've just shared with you, one technique you can use. It's also about mindset and lifestyle. Now, if you think for any reason that you are not creative, I'm going to prove to you right now that you are. I want everybody in the room who has ever used a paperclip for any reason other than holding papers together to raise their hand. All right, see? Everybody in the room is creative. Now, here's something else that you do that you don't realize that proves that you are a creative person. I want you to think about all of the various tasks or steps that you take in the morning from the moment you step out of your bed to the moment you get behind the wheel of your car to go to work. If you had to recreate all of those shortcuts that you've invented over the years, you would never get out of the house. We don't give our credit for these little micro innovations that we are constantly doing. You see, it is human nature to constantly look for better ways of doing things. We can't help it. It's automatic with us, and we do it especially for ourselves, and we never give ourselves credit for that. So more than you've ever thought before, you are a very creative person. Now today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what creativity is. We're going to talk about when we are most likely to be creative or innovative, and we're going to look at the characteristics of innovators and creative thinkers. So let's begin with just what creativity is. Just what innovation is. Now, there's a lot of definitions for what innovation is that I think are just wrong. We can boil it down to its bare essence here. Creativity, innovation is all about one thing and one thing only, and that is solving problems. Oh yeah, and that's right where you guys are. That's what your industry does. You solve problems. So the more you think like an innovator, the faster and better equipped you'll be at solving problems and anticipating, which is also key. So when are we most likely to solve a problem? When we're forced into it. When suddenly our back's up against the wall and we've got to fix something with spit and a prayer. Hey, isn't that what WD-40 and duct tape are for? You've heard that old proverb dozens of times before that Plato first said, necessity is the mother of invention. Necessity is the way we are most likely to be creative. And I'd like to share with you a story of necessity that was told to me by my third grade teacher. My third grade teacher was living in Southern California at the time, and she told of how she went to the beauty salon to get a permanent put in her hair. Well, they had just put the solution in her hair. She's waiting for it to set when all of a sudden the room started to shake, glass started to break, people started to scream, and yes, it was an earthquake. Well, a few moments later, the room settled down and everybody jumped up and ran outside of the building. And so she follows everybody out, goes up to her stylist and says, don't I need to get this stuff out of my hair? He goes, oh yeah, you need to get that out of your hair. She says, well, let's go back in and wash it. He goes, I'm not going back in there. She goes, oh, don't be a big baby. Oh, I'll just do it myself. Now, why was she so intent on getting back in there and washing her hair? Why would she go into a dangerous building? Well, basically, it's vanity. Because if she didn't get that stuff out of her hair, heck, it was going to fall out. Yeah. So she was totally motivated. She goes into the salon by herself. She goes up to the first sinks, turns the water faucets, and uh-oh, no water. The main had broken. She started searching for an alternative, and who can tell me what solution she came up with? The toilet? Yes. Has this happened to you before? Absolutely. That's what she did. She said she wandered through the building. There was no water available except for that which was in the bowl. And she stood there and looked down into the water and thought, lose my hair or plunge. She plunged. And to my third grade mind, that was the most horrible thing you could do. And I could never, ever forget that story. Sometimes we are forced into being creative. Now, there's a variation on necessity I'd like to share with you, and that's when we are annoyed into being creative. When we're irritated. When something's broken, don't you just want to fix it? Isn't it the squeaky wheel that always gets the oil? Well, I want all of you to think about the various tasks that you do every single day, whether it's at home or at work. Because I know there's at least one that you absolutely hate to do. And that is an area that is ripe for a little innovation. That is an area that's ripe for creative thinking, because if you hate to do it, there are probably countless other people in the world that hate to do it as well. And if you can come up with a better way of doing it, you might have $1 million idea on your hands. Now, speaking of $1 million ideas, I'd like to share with you a quote from Thomas Stemberg. Thomas Stemberg is the founder of several successful businesses. But probably the only one you've ever heard of is Staples office supply stores. Thomas Stemberg once said, I get my best ideas for starting a new business from having been frustrated as a customer. Wow, I'm going to repeat that, because that one statement is like a roadmap for finding opportunity. I get my best ideas for starting a new business from having been frustrated as a customer. Where have you been frustrated as a customer? Oh yeah. Is there already $1 million idea lurking around in the back of your mind because you know you can do it better? Yeah. Well, here's another one. How is your competition frustrating their customers? Can you find that out? Can you fix that? Because if you can take all those customers away and boost your own market share. One last one. What about you? How are you frustrating your customers? Oh, yeah. Ask your clients. They'll tell you. And then you can fix it. That's why so many companies are constantly running surveys. They want to know if they're screwing up. They don't want to lose those customers. So there, I've just given you, what, $3 or $4 million ideas in the last 2 minutes. I want commissions. All right. So we're talking about frustration as a customer. I'd like to share with you a story of a man who was frustrated as a customer. I want to share with you the story of Rico Elmore. Rico Elmore is a big guy. He is 6'3", 300 plus pounds. And when Rico got married, he and his wife went to Las Vegas for their honeymoon. Well, he promptly lost his sunglasses. No big deal, he thought. I'll just go buy another pair. Well, he went store after store after store, and nobody had any sunglasses that would fit his fat head. He's like, you know what? This is really annoying. He goes, you know what? When I get home, I'm going to make sure this never happens again. I'm going to have some glasses custom made for me. I'm going to have several pairs so that if I lose one, I've got a backup. But then as he started to do his research on how to do this, it occurred to him, hey, I can't be the only one having this problem. There's got to be lots of other people who can't find glasses that fit their big heads. So he ended up starting a company instead. He calls it Fatheads, with a Z, Sunglasses. This company was so successful, he had to expand into everyday eyewear. So he changed the name of the company to Fatheads, with a Z, Eyewear. He's now got a multi-million-dollar company. He's everywhere, even Walmart. I'd like to share with you another story of a guy who was frustrated, but not as a customer. A guy who was frustrated with his own business. Now, this is the story of Ed Saunders, who is a large-scale chicken farmer in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Georgia. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with large-scale chicken farming, but they have these huge chicken houses that are nearly the size of a football field where they are raising hundreds of thousands of chickens at a time. And it doesn't matter how reliable your system is. It doesn't matter if you have perfect climate control, perfect food you're feeding them, and you keep the houses clean and neat. 1% to 3% of those chickens are going to die every single day. And well, at the end of the week, that's a pretty big pile of dead chickens you got to get rid of. And you can't just chuck them in the trash can. You can't just dig a hole and bury them, and you can't build a bonfire and burn them. There are some strict EPA guidelines you've got to follow, which means there is a solution. Ed Saunders just didn't happen to like it. Well, because frankly, it's gross. It has to do with composting, and that's all I'm going to say. He didn't like it. It was gross and it smelled bad. He wanted a new solution. And so he started thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it, and nothing was coming to mind. So he thought about it some more, and he thought about it some more, and he thought about it some more, and still nothing was coming to mind. Well, then the summer rolled around, and it was time to take the family on vacation. So they piled into the minivan, they drove down to Orlando, and they went to the amusement parks, and then one day, for something different, they went to an alligator farm. Well, his kids are squealing in delight as the alligator wrestler is pinning the alligator's mouth shut with his chin. But Ed Saunders is just relaxing. He's on vacation. He doesn't care. He's kind of moving his gaze over to this other alligator pit where they just happen to be feeding the alligators dead chickens. And he's noticing that the chickens that the alligators are going to first are the ones that look like they've been dead the longest. He's like, man, I have got to get myself a breeding pair of these and take them home with me. And so he did, in full defiance of what everybody in this room knows to be true. You can't raise alligators in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Georgia. It's cold up there. It snows. Guess what? Today, Ed Saunders has 400 alligators. He doesn't have a dead chicken problem anymore. You might be thinking he's got an alligator problem. Literally up to his elbows in alligators. But when those alligators get to be 6 feet long, he sells them for their meat and their hide several $100s a piece. He's now got 2 businesses that complement each other. You see, the more you begin to think like an innovator, the more you begin to embrace elements of the innovator's lifestyle, you will begin to recognize opportunities and trends that nobody else will. You will solve problems faster and easier than ever before. And I'm not even through with the Ed Saunders story. Ed Saunders did something else I've got to tell you about. Ed Saunders did what I call initiating the discovery process. Now, you initiate the discovery process by taking first your powerful desire to solve a problem, and then you put some effort behind it. And once you have put a certain amount of effort into it, suddenly your subconscious mind takes over and starts working on helping you solve this 24/7. That's what happened to Ed Saunders. He wasn't thinking about the problem anymore. He was relaxing and enjoying a vacation with his family when suddenly the answer appeared before his eyes. But I said it works 24/7. And I know what you're thinking. What about when you're asleep? Even when you're asleep, Albert Einstein had been working on his theory of relativity for years and years, and he just couldn't quite get to that E equal mc squared bit. It's just eluding him. It's just slightly out of reach. He knows it's out there, but he hadn't quite figured it out. And then one night, he dreamed the answer in a dream. Your discovery process, your subconscious mind works 24/7. Let me share with you something that will really help you understand this. Think about the last time you were in the market for a new car. You looked at all the different makes and models out there until you finally narrowed it down to the one car you wanted. Now, up until this point in time, you had never noticed that car on the road. But as soon as you made the decision that that's the car you're going to buy, suddenly you see them everywhere. It's like the road is littered with them. And you thought you were being unique. You see, that's the way your subconscious works. If you have a strong enough desire, your subconscious mind wants to help you satisfy that, whether it's solving a problem or getting that new house. Okay, I think I pretty well covered necessity here and its subset variation of annoyance and irritation and frustration. Let's talk about the other two ways you are likely to be creative. You are likely to be creative also necessity, or when you're curious, or when you want to make money. Those are the three ways. So let's look at curiosity, because curiosity is another one of those things that you are taught to suppress as you go through the socialization process. We are told things like, curiosity killed the cat. You don't want to be too curious. That's dangerous. But curiosity is a big trait for innovators because they're constantly looking at things and asking this question. I wonder what would happen if you fill in the blanks. Well, let's look at two curious men who, because of their curiosity, led to game-changing innovations. Let's go back to 1946. Percy Spencer was a researcher for Raytheon Radar Company. And he's doing some experiments with the radar one day when he notices, when he goes to get his daily chocolate bar out of his lab coat, that it's kind of melty. It's kind of really soft and mushy, and he goes, I wonder if the radar did that to my chocolate bar. So he gets another one out and puts it in front of the radar, and it melts it right away. So he goes, I wonder what would happen if I put an egg in front of it. So he puts an egg in front of the radar, and it cooked it. He goes, I wonder what would happen if I put some popcorn kernels in front of here. And so he did, and it popped the corn. He goes, oh man, I got to tell R&D about this. Hey guys, you got to come over here and see what the microwaves in this radar is doing to food. And so they did, and a few months later, they came up with the first microwave oven, and who can tell me what they called it? Radar range, yes. All right, let's go back another 10 years, well, that's actually 11, to 1935. Tom Blakely was, at the time, one of the world's best surfers. Now, surfing back then was all done on traditional Hawaiian surfboards, which are just flat boards that are really tall. You could get out on it, you could stand up, and you could pretty much ride the waves straight in, which is pretty fun for a while. Tom wanted to see if he could make this surfboard turn a little bit, but he really couldn't, because if you try to turn on that surfboard, it's going to flip out from under you. You're going to wipe out. You pretty much just get to ride straight in. But then one day he's walking along the beach, and he sees a wrecked motorboat, an old wooden motorboat that has washed up on the shore, and he goes over to look at it, and he notices on the bottom of the boat, because it's upside down, is a small metal keel. He goes, well, they put keels on boats to keep them from flipping over, especially when they're turning. I wonder what would happen if I put a keel on my surfboard. So he actually took that very keel and pried it off the rotten wood, took it home, nailed it to his surfboard. The next day he gets out on the waves and he's able to turn his surfboard. And the other surfers are going, man, what kind of magic are you doing? How are you doing that? And on that day in 1935, Tom Blakely invented the surfboard fin and revolutionized the sport of surfing. It's cool to be curious. Innovators are curious. Exercise your curiosity as often as you can. Okay, and then the third way we are likely to be creative is the way we are most intentionally creative or innovative, because that's to make money. You've heard that saying through your life, if you build a better mousetrap, they're going to beat a path to your door. So if you want to make some money, you want to come up with a better way of doing things. You want to come up with a way of doing things that's going to create customers for you, and it might be an invention, or it might just be a better service, or you just might have a slightly better nuance to what you're doing. But this is the way we are most intentionally likely to be innovative and creative. All right, so let's look at some of the characteristics of creative thinkers. This first one is going to surprise you, because the number one characteristic for being an innovator is simply this. It's belief. That's right. It's the belief that you are. The belief that you are creative, the belief that when you set out to solve a problem, that you'll actually solve it. It is the belief that when you set out to invent or create something, that you will be successful. Now, this trait, this self-belief, this self-confidence also makes the innovators incredibly persistent. They just won't give up. And this makes some psychologists think they're a little crazy. And it makes the people around them sometimes think they're a little crazy. They'll go, why do you keep failing? When are you going to give up? Someone once said this to Thomas Edison. They said, you have failed 1,000 times. When are you going to quit? He goes, I have not failed 1,000 times. I have merely found 1,000 ways that do not work. I'm pretty sure that's an accurate rendition of his voice, don't you think? I've never heard Thomas Edison. But that's it. They have this amazing persistence and this self-belief. Henry Ford probably said it best. He said, if you think you can, or if you think you can't, you are right. Yeah, it's all about self-belief. Now, when you set out to solve a problem for the first time, a lot of times it's a little overwhelming. And I liken it to jumping out of an airplane for the first time. Now, how many of you have gone skydiving? All right, let's see over here. Skydivers over here. Okay, got a few skydivers here. Well, for those of you who haven't, when you first jump out of a plane and do free fall skydiving, there's a few things that happen. First of all, you start feeling that rush of air coming against your skin. And you feel that sick, sinking feeling in your stomach that you've only felt before on a steep roller coaster. And then as you look down, little things on the ground are getting big fast. And your brain, if you're not careful, will go into information overload and you will get paralyzed. You will shut down. And what you have to do is narrow your focus down to just one thing, and that's pull the ripcord. When you set out to solve a problem, the same thing happens. It's a little overwhelming. There's so much information involved. It becomes a little daunting. So how do you solve that? Well, you narrow the focus down to one thing. You accurately and concisely state the problem. Because the more precisely and accurately you state the problem, the more likely you are to solve it. because it's easier to keep in front of your mind if you can put it in a single sentence. At best, a short paragraph. When you can state it that accurately and that briefly, it helps you focus on what needs to be accomplished, and then you can go beyond that and then look at the rest of all the information and aspects that you need to consider. All right. Let's go on to characteristic number 2. Now, this is a good one. This is a big part of innovators, because innovators and creative thinkers are flexible in their thinking even when they don't have to be. They are willing to abandon the traditional ways of doing things and go off in new directions. They question authority. They challenge the status quo. Now, I want to read you a quote from a physicist, which really, I think, brings home the importance of questioning things. And that's what innovators do. They constantly question. They ask, why are we doing it this way? Why can't we do it that way? Now, this is a quote from Carlo Rovelli, an Italian physicist. He said, "The very foundation of science is to keep the door open to doubt. Precisely because we keep questioning everything, especially our own premises, we are always ready to improve our knowledge. Therefore, a good scientist is never certain. Lack of certainty is precisely what makes conclusions more reliable than conclusions of those who are certain, because the good scientist will be ready to shift to a different point of view if better elements of evidence or novel arguments emerge. Therefore, certainty is not only something of no use, but is in fact damaging if we value reliability." Become a questioner. And the other trait that kind of falls in with this ability to think flexibly, to go off in new directions, is the fact that innovators are willing to take risks and break the rules. And I'll get into that a little bit more later, because when you go off and leave the traditional ways of doing things, that reminds me that creativity, that innovation really hates too much freedom. It doesn't like a lot of freedom or prosperity, because think about it. If you live in the Garden of Eden, why would you change anything when everything you need is an arm's reach away? Yes, creativity is challenged by boundaries. Creativity is kind of like a prisoner looking to bust out of jail. That's where this phrase comes from that we hear so often, thinking outside of the box. Well, if you find yourself in a box, you want to get out of it. Nobody wants to be in a box. Well, unless you're a cat. Cats like to be in boxes, except for maybe Schrodinger's cat. Okay, some of these jokes are just for me. But here's the thing. You have to be comfortable with risk to be an innovator. And what is it about the innovator that makes them so much more comfortable and willing to take risk, when the rest of us, most people, are risk averse? Well, it goes back to characteristic number 1. Characteristic number 1, they have that belief. They just don't believe they're going to fail. And so they are willing to take risk and break the rules, because they figure, once I have succeeded in inventing or solving the problem that I have set out to solve, nobody's going to care that I broke a few rules. All right. So what does it mean to take a risk? Well, if there's a risk involved, it means that something can be lost. That's right. Maybe you lose some time. Maybe you lose some money. Maybe you're embarrassed and you lose some face. There are varying levels of risk, and I encourage you to become more comfortable with risk, and I'm going to suggest that what you do is you take on some baby risks to get comfortable, and then you add and take bigger and bigger risks. So I'm going to suggest to you 6 low consequence risks that you can take that will help you become more comfortable with risk. Now, the first one is this. If you drink coffee every day, I want you to switch to tea for the next month. That's right. It's going to take you a lot more caffeine to get to where you were before. There's 5 times the amount of caffeine in coffee to tea. You're going to either be drinking a lot of tea and going to the bathroom, or you're going to be cranky. That's a risk. Okay, second one. If you read the newspaper every day, I know there's at least one section that you never look at. I want you to read that one first for the next month. Okay, guys, it's okay to read about society or fashion. It's not going to kill you. A little bit of risk of time there. All right, the next one. Here's a fun one. Rearrange one piece of furniture in your house. That's right. Every time you pass that room, you're going to go, what is it about this room? Oh, yeah, I moved that chair. Now, I did this last summer, not intentionally trying to do this exercise. I got a new chair and replaced an old one. But I moved it from the position of the old chair by just 12 inches. And then one night I went flying through that room in the dark and I tackled that new chair. I literally somersaulted over it. I ended up with 2 bruises on my feet, one on my thigh and one on my arm. So, there are risks in moving one piece of furniture if you forget where you put it. All right, 3 more. I want you to spend a little bit of time every day writing with your non-dominant hand. Just a little bit. Okay, that one's the easy one. I also want you to brush your teeth with your non-dominant hand. I try this. This is harder for me than writing. Writing with my left hand is easier than brushing my teeth with my left hand. I'm kind of like, I can't get enough friction. And my teeth aren't clean when I brush with my left hand. All right, the final one. And this is the riskiest one of all if you're married or in a relationship or have a partner. That's right, I want you to sleep on the opposite side of the bed. Yeah, because now you got to get your spouse involved. And then both of you are going to wake up on the wrong side of the bed. These are fun. All right, and there's many more. You can keep ratcheting it up from there. So you want to get started with some risk. Now, I'm just about ready to talk about characteristic number 3. But before we do that, we have really danced around this ideas. I haven't defined what an idea is, and a lot of people really don't know what an idea is, and that's very important before we talk about this next characteristic. An idea is not born from nothing. Ideas are born from 2 parents at least. It takes 2 or more existing concepts that you combine, that you meld together, that you synthesize into something new. And this is also a great way for you to exercise your imagination. Every now and then, just pick up an object or a product and try to come up with a new use for that was never intended. Or take 2 objects and try to combine them into something new. It doesn't have to be a real product. It can be a fantasy product, because this is just an exercise in stimulating your creative thinking, working your imagination. Okay, let's talk about characteristic number 3. This one is big. This is a big, huge part of the lifestyle. Innovators and creative thinkers expose themselves to as many different viewpoints and new stimuli as they possibly can. Because you see, what you're doing is you're experiencing new things. And the more experiences you have, new experiences that you have, you literally lay down new neural pathways in your brain. You open up new electrical connections between the brain cells in your brain, which gives you a greater capacity and more data from which to draw on when you're making new combinations. So you want as much as you can possibly upload. And there's a benefit here. Now, I told you before at the very beginning that becoming an innovator will keep you from becoming senile as you get older. Because you see, the more of those electrical connections you open up in your brain, what happens is as you age, brain cells die. And if there's only one electrical connection to a group of memories, you've lost that. But if you have enough electrical connections in your brain literally will rewire itself and keep you from losing memories and keep you from becoming senile as you grow older. So there's a health benefit. Now, I believe I also mentioned that it's going to improve your sex life. I said that earlier. Well, when you go out and experience something new, you stimulate the dopamine receptors in your brain. That makes you feel good. And when you first started dating your partner, you know how it is if you've been together in a relationship for a long time, how your sex life kind of diminishes, you know? Well, when you first started dating that person, they were new. And when you would do things, it would stimulate your dopamine receptors and you would feel good. So if you take your spouse and y'all go out and experience something new, you're both going to stimulate your dopamine receptors. It's going to trigger those romantic feelings that you felt years ago. And the next thing you know, you're going to be in the back seat of the car. All right. There's some benefits for you. So here's the thing, though. Sometimes you're going to have to force yourself to try new things. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, come on, Rob. I got my job. I got my family. I've got that hobby you want me to spend more time on. Where am I supposed to experience these new things? Well, I got you covered. Now, I know scientists are now saying today that there is no such thing as multitasking. But I'm going to prove them wrong. I'm going to give you 2 ways you can multitask and experience new things by doing it while you're doing something else you already do every single day. All right, the first one is, next time you get in the car, I want you to listen to a different music format than what you always listen to. If you always listen to rock and roll, I want you to listen to classical or country or rip-rap. Rip-rap, hip-hop. All right, do it for a month. And then the next month, switch to another musical format. The idea isn't to learn to love it, but warning, you might. The idea is to create new experiences for yourself while you're just driving. You'll put new information in your head. All right, that's the first one. The second one is I want you to go to, next time you're at the convenience store, bookstore, grocery store, or drugstore, I want you to go to the magazine rack. I want you to pick up 3 or 4 magazines on topics you know nothing about. It could be anything. It could be something you're interested in, but you've never learned anything about. Or something that's just completely foreign and not of interest to you, but I want you to pick up 3 or 4 magazines. It could be anything. It could be knitting, butterfly collecting, shooting, motorcycle riding, whatever it is that's something you don't know about. I want you to buy 3 or 4 magazines. I want you to take them home, and I want you to put them on your toilet tank. That's right. You're just going to be sitting there anyway. You might as well be exposing yourself, pun intended. You might as well be exposing yourself to new information. Read those magazines cover to cover, including the ads, because you're going to get different viewpoints just as much as you're going to be getting new information. And those new experiences are right there. You're multitasking. All right. Now, I want to conclude today, and I've got 2.5 minutes. I want to conclude today by sharing a personal story with you that I hope will drive home this idea of reading a magazine that you've never read before. Now, this is a story about my parents, which is sometimes difficult for me to tell because they're no longer with us. And while it's ultimately a story about my dad, it's really a story about my mom, and I need to give you some background. My mother was a voracious reader. Any spare minute she had her nose stuck in a book. But the odd thing was she wouldn't read fiction. I remember coming home from high school once and telling her about a novel that was so good that she ought to read it. And she looked at me, she goes, no, I don't read fiction. I only read nonfiction. Give me something good for my mind. She actually said that. Now, who says that? I thought that was really weird. But years later, when I became an adult, I learned why. You see, my mother was born during the Depression to a blue-collar family. Now, neither one of her parents went beyond 8th grade in their education, and she wasn't really encouraged to go too far with her education because you're just going to get married. But she did. She finished high school, and she went 1 year to college to become an X-ray technician. Then she met my dad and married into a family of professionals, a family of doctors, lawyers, accountants, engineers, and a mother-in-law who didn't mind letting my mother know she thought Dad married a little too far down the social ladder. Yeah, my grandma. Well, my mother wanted to be accepted by her new family, but she found that that education deficit made a difference. She couldn't keep up with a lot of conversations that were going on at the family dinners, and she was determined to close that gap, so that's when she started reading as much as she could so that she could get rid of that education deficit she had. That's the background. Here's the story. Around 1960 or 61, my father was diagnosed with kidney failure. Now, I was a toddler at the time, 3, 4 years old. All I remember is that my strong daddy could no longer pick me up and carry me anymore. I noticed he didn't go to work as often as he used to, that he would lay in bed all day or have to lay on the sofa. I also noticed that my mother took over most of the driving, and that occasionally she had to pull off on the side of the road so that he could throw up. Those are my memories as a toddler. What I didn't know is what the doctor told my father. Mr. Wilson, you have kidney failure. There is no cure. You have less than a year to live. You need to make your plans. And so they did. First thing they did was they sold the house. And my father, who was a builder, took the proceeds from that and built a 3-unit apartment house with the idea that my mother, my sister, and I could live in 1 unit and live partially off the rents of the other 2. Now, my mother was a stay-home mom, and she had not worked in years. The goal was that when that inevitable day came, she would go to work part-time at first, and then when my sister and I started school, she'd go to work full-time then. In the meantime, she started taking some temp jobs in order to beef up her skills and to develop a network to help her find that permanent job when the time came. And then something interesting happened at one of those temp jobs. There was 2 hours of downtime. I don't know if it was an unreliable x-ray machine or some other reason that she had 2 hours to kill. So she went into the doctor's office lobby and she went to the magazine rack. She scanned over the popular titles of the day and then noticed on the bottom shelf a several months out of date copy of the New England Journal of Medicine. And she goes, I'll read that. It'll be good for my mind. And she sat down and started to read. After a few minutes, she realized she was reading an article about some physicians in Boston who were doing some experimental surgery. The surgery they were doing was the world's first organ transplants. And as she read on, she learned that the organ they were transplanting was the kidney. Now, she got pretty excited at this point and started reading more intently. And as she read on, she learned that those doctors were looking for volunteers, at least when the magazine came out. But there was a catch. The volunteers had to have an identical twin. My father happened to have an identical twin. And at that point, my mother abandoned the magazine and went right to the phone. And she started dialing Boston until she got one of those physicians on the phone. And when she did, the doctor said, yes, Mrs. Wilson, we are still looking for volunteers. Please send me your husband and his brother. So that night, my mother and my father went to visit my uncle. And his answer, to save your life, absolutely you can have a kidney. And I tell you this story because if my mother had not had a lifelong habit of exposing herself to new things, my father would never have become the 12th person in the world to have a kidney transplant and live. And I wouldn't have gotten my dad for 18 more years. You see, when you begin to think like an innovator, when you begin to embrace the innovator's lifestyle, you will recognize opportunities and trends that others will not. You will solve problems faster and easier than ever before. You will handle change like a boss. I want to thank you for having me here today. It's been a great pleasure speaking to you.